Hey everyone, this is me, the Undead Viking. I'm here to talk to you about this game today. It's called Rampaging Jotunn. I probably should have looked that up. I'm sure, being Norwegian and being, like, I guess, part Viking as far as my ancestry goes, since this is about Vikings and giants and saving your villages and Ragnarok and what have you, I probably should... Jotunn? Jotunn? I don't know. I never looked it up, so I apologize. But I'm sure somebody will correct me. Anyway, this is a two-player game where each person is trying to protect their villages against the other person's rampaging armies, and also this big, giant, stumbling Jotunn that is just crushing everything in its path. It's like this. It's like a neutral thing that everybody can kind of push and prod in certain directions and try to like mess with the other players, which makes for turns like what would be like a pretty decent just strategy game of you and another person having a war on this small little island, but making it a lot of fun because there's this like big giant yo-yo that's bouncing back and forth and obliterating everything in its path. So let me show you exactly how the game is played, and then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Alright, cool. Alright, this is Rampaging Jotunn, and before I tell you how to play the game, just keep in mind what I have in front of me is a prototype, and so what you see in front of you may or may not be what the final game is going to look like once it is published. Alright, so this game is really easy to play, but it has a lot of different tactical and strategic decisions that you have to make in each and every one of your turns, which is something that I really like about that, something that I will talk about in my final thoughts. But to set up the game, what happens is that each player will draw 3 of these tiles, these like kind of cool little triangular tiles. They'll take these tiles and they have this center hex right there, and you're going to build the island up around that center hex. Now each person takes a turn placing one down until you just go around in a clockwise fashion until the island is created. After the island is created, each person will take a turn putting their village down on the board. And you have to put all 3 of your villages down, obviously. You put them on the edges. The only rule there is that they have to be within they have to be more than 2 hexes away. You can't put them close to each other. You have to put them 2 hexes away to be set up. Once you've done that, you take your 2 armies and you place them in a hex next to one of your villages. And so then both people have all 3 of their villages out, and both people are going to have both of their armies out. The final thing you do is you put this giant down in the middle. This hex in the middle has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 on it. You roll 1 die, and then that tells you the direction that the giant will be facing at the beginning of the game, which is important because the giant is always wanting to move forward unless you alter the way that he goes. Each person will get 5 cards. I'll just draw 5 for one player here to explain the game. And then on your turn, you get to do one of 3 things. You can play a card from your hand. You can expend one of your movement cards that you have available. As you use these movement cards, you flip them over. You'll notice these are blue on the blue on the back, and these are red on the back. As you turn those over, you will not have access to them until you use all 3 of your movement cards, and then at that time you flip over all of them so you have access to them again. Because these are common knowledge, it adds to the strategy and the depth of the game because you can kind of see what the options are in some limited fashion of what your opponent has. You can also play 1 card from your hand. Cards will be one of 3 things. They will be a giant card, which will allow you to affect the giant in one way. This one says if you play this, you get to turn 1 facing, and then you get to move it 2 movement points. Movement points are important because you don't go by the spaces. You go by the terrain that is on the spot. You have plains, you have forests, you have mountains, and you have these giant volcanoes. Now, volcanoes are impassable. If a giant would run into a volcano, it immediately goes back to the middle of the board. If an army somehow would land on a volcano, which would be almost impossible to do, unless you have a special card from this deck, and I'll explain that in just a moment, the army is killed and taken off of the board. So, but the other movement points are the grasslands. Both armies and giants will expend 1 movement point to move on grasslands. Armies expend 2 movement points on a forest, 1 for giants, and mountains are 4 movement points for an army and 2 for giants. So if we played this with 1 turn facing and forward 2 movement points, if I went like one movement facing to this, and I used both 2 movement points to get up on that mountain, and that's where the giant would be. If I had just moved it one facing like this and you 2 movement points, it would go forward like this. You must complete whatever the giant's directions are. You can't half it. You can't say, I'm not going to do the one facing turn, but I am going to take the 2 movement points. You don't have that option. You have to do the complete thing. Couple other quick things about giants. If they end up on a spot with an army, that army is considered to be trampled and killed, but the giant does not continue forward. If they still have movement points, they will stop in that location, and that'll be the end of their turn. If they end up in a spot with a village that has no protection, I'll explain that in just a quick second, they will destroy the village, and then they will go back to the middle of the board again, keeping the facing that they were at when they accomplished the dirty deed of destroying that village. All right, so if you play, that's what happens when you play a giant card. If you play an army card, and this is one of a couple army cards, there's also army cards that allow you to redistribute a dead army. Basically you're playing one card. Something I'll explain. Just give me a quick second. This allows you to move your army 2 spaces regardless of the type. That means that your armies could move over a volcano by doing that. Regardless of terrain, they can just go there. If for whatever reason, I don't know why, an army would end up on the spot with a volcano, they would die. Okay, so, and when 2 armies meet, they do have combat, and I'll explain that also in just a quick second. The final type of card you have are these village cards, a card of defensive line. That's what these little chits are. When you create a defensive line, you put it under a village of your choice, and it basically protects it against both giants and armies. If an army wanted to destroy a place that had the defensive line on it, so you just go like this to put that on there, and say a red army moved in there, they would have to roll a 4 or better to defeat that defensive line, and then you remove that, and then you destroy the village, automatically. It is possible for you to garrison a village by placing a soldier on that location. In that case, then you would have to not only defeat the defensive line, but then go through the combat against the army and defeat that before you could defeat the village as well. Giants still have to defeat that defensive line. If they do, they have to roll a 3 or better on a die to defeat the defensive line, but then they would do the standard trampling that they would normally do. They would trample the army, they would trample the village, and they would destroy it. So pretty straightforward, as far as that rule is concerned. All right, so combat works very simple. When an army enters in the spot with another army, you both roll a die. Whoever is attacking the spot, so blue would be attacking red in this situation, you roll both dice and you add 1 to the attacking die, and you see who wins. So in this case, blue would lose. You would remove that army from the board. If there is a tie, so 5 plus 1, remember they get the bonus, that would be 6 to 6. You re-roll and attack again. However, the attacker loses their bonus because they've lost their charge momentum, if you will. All right, so that is how combat works. Once again, pretty straightforward, but that's kind of one of the simplicity, beautiful things about this game. So the final thing that you can do, besides turning one of these cards over to move one of your armies, besides playing a card in your hand, is that you can discard any 3 cards from your hand and you just put them down, and that also allows you to regrow an army in one spot next to any of your available villages. If there happens to be an army next to your village and you take that action, you can drop the army right on top of that one, and you would go ahead and process the attack, and you would get the charge bonus for doing so. You can't automatically garrison when you create an army. They have to start in a spot next to the village that you're putting that on. All right, so the game, it just basically continues like that, each person taking a turn, either moving the giant, rampaging around the countryside, and that's kind of cool too, because the giant, both people can affect its movement, pushing and pulling. And I should say that if you don't play a card that affects the giant's movement, the giant will just continue moving forward in the direction that they're facing at the end of your turn, no matter whose turn it is. If the giant ever reaches the end of a board, it will turn around and head back the same way. Turning around costs 1 movement point, but so it will just, if nobody does anything, it'll just keep going back and forth on the path that it's at. So each player will just keep, as I said, you keep drawing cards. Oh, I should mention one last thing. You always draw up to 5 cards at the end of your turn, unless you spent 3 cards to redistribute an army. In that case, you are kind of stuck having 2 cards in your hand until the end of your next turn, which then you can redraw back up to 5. So, it does cost a little bit in both cards to redistribute an army, but also it costs a little bit as far as your options on your next turn as well. But each person will go back and forth until all of their villages have been destroyed. Once all that person's villages have been destroyed, the person that has villages left will win the game of Rampaging Jotunn. So, as I said, this game, it has a lot of simple rules and a lot of really straightforward strategy, but the tactics and like the timing of the game really make it stand out, as well as, just like, I mean, obviously the cool thing is this giant that this giant figure, like, just stumbling and crushing things in its path, and it's just kind of this mindless automaton unless you kind of push it in certain directions. And making somebody trying to decide whether or not they're going to move one of their armies, or like having to stop the giant from like crushing things in its path, makes for some wonderful decisions and some wonderful anxiety that you can put on the other player. But let me talk more about all that with my final thoughts, which I'll do right now. Oh, that was a good one. All right, there you go. So that is Rampaging Jotunn. Rampaging Giants. So there you go. As I said during the gameplay portion of the video, there's a lot of things that I really liked about this. I mean, I like the theme. I like the whole idea of this like fairly mindless creature just stumbling around the island, destroying things. But it's just, because it's a 2-player game, and because it's you against one other person you're kind of matching wits, you have this combination of being able to like have the perfect cards in the perfect moment to kind of just push the giant in certain directions. But the big thing is kind of like funneling your opponent into a limited number of options that they have. As you place your armies and you get them into threatening positions that they can then destroy other people's villages, and putting their game at risk, you then can use this giant as and prodding him in the right direction as like an added force. And so but at the same time you kind of want to use your armies defensively in some way, but you can't be completely defensive, because if you don't destroy the other person's villages, you're not going to win. And so the thing is that this game, I think maybe at one time they probably wanted this game to have really deterministic combat, like as far as just like the 2 armies meet, you figure out who wins, no dice. But I really, really appreciate the fact that there is the dice combat in the game, because of the fact that like sometimes, like, when the giant is breathing down your neck and stumbling down the mountain and he's getting ready to destroy your last village, and you absolutely positively need, to beat the other person's army so you have a shot, I want that chance of being able to roll the die higher than the other person. And, this is a game where I believe and I feel that having those swings of luck, to affect the combat, both in like the card draws as well, being able to draw the perfect card for the perfect situation, that sort of thing. I think that adds like a great deal of needed swinginess to the results of the game. And I'm a big believer in chaos and luck in games, and I'm also a big believer in a game giving you mitigation for that luck. And I do feel that this game gives you enough of that so you don't feel like you're just at the whim of the chaos gods, if you will. But if you're looking for a 2-player game with a really cool theme and something that you can play in in a relatively short period of time, my games of this lasted, after both people knew like how to play the game and like how to roll with it, my players, we were getting it done in about 30 minutes. So this is kind of that perfect lunchtime game. If I was still working in a giant corporate office, this would be a game that I bring with and I play with my buddies at work, because it is straightforward enough and quick enough that you're able to play during that break. But there you go. That is Rampaging Jotunn, and if you have any questions about the game or any concerns or anything at all, please ask away. I'll try to answer those to the best of my ability. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. And until next time, I am the Undead Viking, and I'm telling you to have yourself one heck of an awesome day. All right, bye-bye.